In his role as director of 1 and 4, he was... Thank you very much, Dr. Hahn, and to Chris and to everybody else for the invitation to come and speak to you. There's a reason why I never write my own bios. I often fail to recognise myself when I hear other people talking about me like that. But anyway, interesting moment when the lights were going out. I was making a speech last week to the Irish Primary Principals Network. They have their annual conference. It's actually a fantastic organisation that advocates for education, a network of principals in the country. And I was talking about whether or not we actually have, in reality, a right to education here in Ireland, something that I would contend we don't. We certainly don't have a respect for the right to education here in Ireland, particularly for free primary education. And of late, particularly after the publication of the Murphy and the Ryan report and all of those other issues recently, obviously the big debate right now is in primary education is on patronage. And the focus seems to be on the notion that we need to get the church out of schools. And I've been saying for some years that the issue isn't whether we get the church out, the issue is whether or not we get the state in. And that one of the important parts, or one of the rich parts of our education system, in making change where it's needed, we should also have the capacity to recognise some of what works well, or some of the values that might exist within what already works well. And the notion that we should have a diverse range of providers in education, even if we've never made that real, seems to me to be a very sensible approach. The point of the story is the lights going out. I was making my speech, and I said, some people are saying that the debate in relation to the patronage is all about getting the church out of education. And at that moment, as those words came out of my mouth, the whole room went black. The lights went, the electricity went, everything went, and I was standing in front of 1,000 people, and of course everybody thought it was a divine intervention. The expectation was I was going to say something very negative about the church. My point was that it was less divine intervention, and maybe if it was divine anything, it was paranoia, because I wasn't going to say anything bad in the first place. We were fine. So lights going out aren't necessarily always a bad thing. But just to talk a little bit about what maybe I'd like to achieve this morning, if we can at all. I think these opportunities are best if they're conversations. Rather than me standing up here talking at you for an hour, there's over 100 of you in the room. It'd be really good if we had an opportunity as far as possible for us to talk to each other. So what I want to do maybe is throw out some ideas and then make you work and get you to think about the things that you think we could talk about, or that I could, questions that I might respond to that you might have. And in doing that, can I please encourage you that in particular, if there are questions that are in your head but that you think you probably shouldn't ask, then those are probably exactly the questions that you should. There isn't any question that you might want to ask me that I'm worried about getting. I wouldn't be here if there was. So if there's something that you would usefully like to ask me, or something that's in your mind that you might want to ask, please go ahead and do it. And maybe particularly the ones that you think you shouldn't would be really, really valuable. As the years go by, and coming and talking to people like this, I sometimes have to remind myself that I've been doing this for a while. And it's about 15 years in particular since, well, it's 16 years actually, this month, probably this week actually, since I reported what had happened to me to the guards back here in Ireland. I've been living in the UK since 1986, and by 1994 I started to realise that there were things I needed to deal with. I'd spent a lot of my life running from the things that had happened to me, particularly in my teens, the whole experience of sexual abuse by a priest. And by about 1994, I'd been living in the UK at that point for 8 years. And the way that I say it in the book, and thank you very much for the plug, President, is I'd started to stop running, which meant that for the first time in my life, the idea that I had a past, or that there were things in my past that related to my present, started to become real for me, because I wasn't running anymore. Up until that point, everything I did in my life, I lived from the neck up and the face out. I was so frightened of dealing with the things that had happened in my past and what I thought they said about me, or who I was as a person, that I just didn't go there. The past was a place that I didn't belong to and that I had no connection with. I used to think that my life was kind of like a series of books that I read. So I had a relationship with it, but I didn't relate to it as my lived experience because I didn't dare. It was too scary. I was too frightened of what I believed it said about me. I was at a point, and it's not unique, it's pretty common for anybody who's experienced abuse as a child, that I believe the things that had happened to me reflected who I was. That
the experiences I had defined me, or rather that everything that was wrong about them was me. I was what was wrong, I was what was bad, I was what was evil, foul, disgusting, unacceptable, all of that stuff. In saying all of this, I'm very conscious that I'm in a large room of people. And if we look at what we know about child abuse, particularly in the Irish context, 27% of Irish women and men have acknowledged an experience of sexual violence as children. So 1 in 4 people in this room will have shared that experience. So I'm not the only one in this room who understands or can relate to that experience, or has lived to it, is living to try to address that experience, struggling to address it, triumphing in addressing it, or whatever the whole range of experience will be there. By 1994, as I said, I realised that I needed to do something. And it wasn't that I was yet in a position where I could acknowledge what had happened to me and relate it directly to myself. I still wasn't able to do that. But I was very concerned about the idea that it might still be happening to somebody else. And I remember that the last time I had seen the man who abused me as a teenager, this priest, he had offered me money because he knew that I needed to get away from where I lived. He knew that I was desperate, I was depressed, I was just in a bad way. I needed to get away from the life that I felt I was caught in and get to somewhere else. And he offered me money if I would find somebody, as he put it, like me but younger than me, who would have sex with him. And at that point, I ran. I couldn't, whilst I had found some way to stay alive and survive what was happening to me, the idea that I could in some way be brought into making this happen to somebody else, or that I was going to have to deal with the idea that this could be happening to somebody else, was too much for me, and I ran. But in 1994, when I started to think there's that thing back there that I need to do something about, this was what came up, the idea that this could still be happening to somebody else. That was also, that's true, that's real. My concern was real, and I've come to recognise that more over the years. But it's also the case that that was the easy way to begin to acknowledge that there was a problem, because I could make it about somebody else, and I didn't have to deal with how that problem was about me. I didn't have to deal with my own feelings, what I was carrying inside myself, my own fear, my own trauma, my own hurt, my own self-loathing and disgust and disconnection with myself. And so it was easier to make it about somebody else. However it happened, and there's a much longer story to that I won't get into now, in 1995, so 14 years ago this month, and actually this week, I came back to Ireland from the UK and made my first statement to the guards. And when I made that statement, I thought that where this would end up was hopefully in a court, and hopefully I'd get a chance to stand up in a courtroom and say what had happened to me. But my expectation was that it would be me saying what happened to me and him saying it didn't happen. It would be my word on the table. Despite those concerns about what might still be happening to other people, I had no sense then, or no real understanding then, of either the scale of the abuse that was happening, and the scale of his own perpetration of abuse, the sheer number of people he had abused, and the depravity and extent of the abuse that he had perpetrated, or even more significantly, the extent of the knowledge that existed, not just at a community level, but at an institutional level all the way through the Catholic Church, and in many institutions of the state, both in terms of child protection and Garda Síochána at various points over the years. I had no understanding of that at all. And it was after I made that statement that the investigation started, and thankfully we were all very lucky that there was a fantastic detective, Garda detective, Pat Mulcahy, who was the lead investigator on the case. And he just did a stunning job. He was an extraordinary human being, just huge awareness and sensitivity and strength, and huge determination to get to the truth. And he went out and started asking questions, and as some indication of just how much of this was out there, as soon as he asked the questions, people started to come forward. It was like all anybody had to do was ask, and it started to burst above the surface. And within about 5 weeks, 5 other men had made statements about their experiences of rape and abuse as teenage boys perpetrated by the same priest. I was relieved and horrified at the same time when that happened, because it meant that that terror that I had of having to stand up in a courtroom on my own was diminished. That if there were 5 other people saying the same thing, that was going to strengthen the case, and there was a strong chance that we'd get the right outcome in a court. And horrified then to realise just the scale of what had been happening. What we also discovered was that in this very small part of rural Wexford, a place called Palfur, which is a half